Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, and today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. Not your average Bandpass bass, but pretty close. So this started out because I had a lesson today, and one of the students wanted me to recreate a sound that was on a Buster song. It's called his track Combine. It was the main bass, and this is pretty close. It's not right there, but it actually reminded me about a very important fact about phasers, because my first assumption was actually that a vocoder was used to vocode just a straight saw wave. And while that is kind of a way of doing this, it's not really the way. And the reason for this is, the reason why I keep thinking whenever I hear a similar sound like this that a vocoder is involved, is because of a very similar effect a vocoder has on the sound that a phaser does. And I've demonstrated this by using the phaser with Harmor. So let's say we should compare this without the other extra processing and just have the distortion on it. Doesn't really sound like anything right now, but as we mess around with the phaser, especially when I increase the feedback, we can actually see we can kind of hear this sound that sort of sounds like the bands of a vocoder. And it's actually pretty much because of the bands of the phaser that are created based on how a phaser does what it does. This is just a regular saw wave that we're using right now. I'm using Harmor, and you might be thinking that's a bit overkill for just using a saw wave, but there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that in a second. There's that's kind of what that does. I've turned the sweep frequency off because normally the phaser moves. And I also have the sweep, the depth are very small because we're modulating it directly. And there you can see the effect that it has on just your basic average saw wave. Now, if I wasn't doing this, and if I wasn't, boy, I have convoluted this patcher. If I didn't have the phaser doing what it's doing, and I just had a regular old saw wave in here, we get a sound that's just aggravatingly close to what we want, but we think there's just this extra nefarious modulation that we can't really place in our minds. And initially I thought it was something just extra, like, EQ modulations and whatever. And for the most part, that's actually kind of what's happening because of the changes that the phaser imparts on the sound. So, even without the chorusing, just adding the phaser in there, puts that change in the spectrum that causes that sound that we're looking for. And of course, I don't want to have the sweep. You kind of just set that where you want, or you can modulate that yourself, which it can be kind of cool sometimes. Not what I wanted. Not so much on the feedback. It's also kind of interesting to note that the feedback basically is related to the bandwidth selection inside of vocoder, because the two have similar results when they go either extreme. With no feedback, it's the widest as possible and it sounds almost like nothing's happening. And then on the highest amount, it's super sharp and ringy, kind of like what it sounds like when you have too little bandwidth on a filter, on a vocoder kind of thing. So that's the control that you want to keep a track of. I'm using just basic distortion. I'm not really doing a lot to control it, but you might notice how, I'll put the chorus back in there. You might notice how when I move around, the bandpass that it really screws with the pitch and the frequency of the sound. And this is why I have Harmor loaded up. And this is because if we use the bandpass filter in here, it doesn't do that to the harmonics that it passes through. It's effectively linear phase. It's not actually linear phase. I mean, it is I guess linear phase in the sense that it doesn't mess with the phase at all, which is the whole point of using the Harmor like this, because in a regular EQ it does mess with the phase, and that's why it moves it appears to actually move the frequencies around, because it's changing the phase really fast over and over again. And as we know from using FM synthesis, changing the phase is essentially changing the pitch, especially while the sound is playing, and in fact only while the sound is playing. So that's why I'm using Harmor, but you don't really need Harmor for the sound. You don't really need to plug it at all, actually. You can just have a solid wave sample, and it'll still do what you want out of it. Just have the phaser, have a chorus. I mean, the chorus is there just to kind of give it some extra fuzz. It's not like integral to the sound. And then a bandpass before distortion, and then the distortion itself is just very large and loud and that kind of thing. And this EQ is just there because I thought I was going to EQ something, but I ended up not doing that. So I'm just going to have not that there. Yeah. And then you have a really basic but really versatile platform for sound, because you can take this and go very interesting places with it. I wasn't modulating this with the sound, but if you modulate it a little bit, like you can even have a sweep on tiny bit. Or even the phaser's own stereo ability. You can modulate the depths, modulate some stuff. But I typically like to have, control over that kind of modulation, so I'll usually just modulate this either without moving it or just as there, just to set it and leave it alone. Alternatively, if you don't want to use a phaser at all and you do want to use Harmor, you can actually just straight up use the phaser inside of Harmor with the basic same idea. Turn out the speed and create the kind of holes in there. And you can mimic what the real phaser does to a similar effect if you're basically trying to create bands. The whole point of this whole thing, and the reason why it sounds like a vocoder, is because of the way that it chops up the frequency spectrum into groups of individual frequencies, and it harmonically removes others. And that is what causes this sort of ringy, glassy kind of thing. When you remove the feedback a bit, it makes it sound that kind of chunkiness. And then the sort of almost talky business is coming from the fact that while we're sweeping the bands, some of them, like these two poles or frequencies here, you can see are they have the hole in between them, and then there's the two pillars are standing up there. When we're moving through them all, that's a very similar movement and very similar sort of presentation of what Formandy stuff looks like. So that's why that happens. And that's a lot of fun. Someone talked to me on Skype. I forgot I had Skype open. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and this will be available in the description for download as a patcher. And as usual, I almost said it correctly, but as usual, have a nice day.